If you're following along and you want to have the slides in front of you and take notes, we're on page 19 in your resource packet. Don't forget the resources in the back that are available. A lot of you have been asking me questions, and a lot of those questions are actually answered in some of the resources that are in the back of your brochure. And don't forget the St. Nectarios Education Fund. Anytime I have an opportunity to speak publicly, I always give mention of this incredible fund. Lest anyone think that my parish is perfect, it's far from it. Our last talk is entitled Formulating a Parish Health Plan. Cliff, you asked about, what are the next steps? And I said, let me try to get to that tomorrow. We're running tight on time. I'm going to try to rush through these slides so that we have some time for perhaps discussion and some comments from all of you about what you picked up. Well, obviously, this past 24 hours, the title of our theme of Reclaiming the Great Commission is itself a telling title, because it suggests that something needs to be retrieved or recovered in our communities. And I think that's true. In some sense, the question of how we lost sight of the Great Commission has been in the background of all of our conversations. Not far from me, there's a Greek Orthodox parish that is over 100 years old. And the parish was lovingly and sacrificially founded by 100 Greek immigrant families. In fact, the parish records record that fact. Now, I attended its 100th anniversary. And at the time, in the brochure that accompanied those celebrations, there was a note that the parish at this time was just under 100 student families. So it started with 100 families, and 100 years later, it was just under that number. Now, a decade later, the parish has dwindled to 40 families. Now, that event that's occurred not too far from me is occurred in many other parishes. In fact, in the surrounding towns near this parish, there used to be churches, Orthodox parishes, that are no longer in existence. And such facts, they make me wonder if something could have been done to change the outcome before it was too late. So obviously, lots of factors come in positively or negatively that affect the health and therefore the growth and vitality of our parishes. And I've attempted very quickly to give you an outline of what those factors are, and in a very brief time now, to outline a path forward. Otherwise, really, if you go home and we don't make use of this, then what good was it? Now, before I do this, though, I think we must recognize that one of the risks we face is that knowing what we do will do nothing. And there are many reasons for our inaction. Some of you probably feel overwhelmed. There's several of you who have come up to me and like, where do I start? A lot of you feel ill-prepared. I don't have the training. And so you might freeze or run scared. Lots of you have said to me, I don't know where to start. Now, I'm not sure. Some might even feel that the topic's irrelevant. My parish is doing okay. Now, I would tell you that research shows that if you have plateaued, then you are about to die. A parish is a little bit like a shark. A shark can't breathe if it's not swimming. You have to be moving. St. John of the Ladder said, move up or move down, but don't move sideways like a crab. Of course, some might disagree with the things that I've presented, and that's okay. I don't have all of the answers. I'm sharing with you from my own experiences and learnings, and there are many out there who can do a better job and who have more information. And they're probably even in your own parishes. But the bottom line is something that I said yesterday. If I did not capture your gut and your heart, then it won't really matter. You have to feel it in your own bones, and that must propel you to go back home and do something. So, step one. Cliff, you asked for a list. I'm going to give it to you. I think the first thing that you have to do when you get back home is articulate your definition of parish health. Now, don't worry. If you completely borrow mine, that's fine. And if you don't, I won't be offended. But I know that you have to start here. You have to decide, what is the definition that our leadership agrees upon, and articulate that definition. Don't make it too big. I only have 4, right? Spirituality, gospel and life. Next one. Social connectivity, excellence in our organizational behavior. Okay. So once you've done that, you can kind of set your priorities. And so step 2, take stock. You know, it's said that a trip up Mount Everest begins 2 years before someone takes 1 step on the mountain. And I think that's a proper metaphor for setting out for parish health. When I became captivated and enthusiastic about the idea of parish health, and this as the means of growth and vitality, I started asking questions. The questions haven't stopped, but it also led me down a path of transformation. Now, I told you earlier that some people who know me say, hey, Father, the world is moving too slow for you and too fast for us. But, you know, the reality is that if you're going to climb Mount Everest, which I think for many of us is the truth when we look at, let's say, revamping the culture of our communities or developing leadership, you've got to think about it. You got to take stock. You got to sort of gather your inner group and do some careful thinking and reflection. Now, my gut and my heart is still convinced for this work, but I've mellowed a bit and I've grown wiser. And even still, in my own parish, there are things I want to do. But it was a terminally ill parishioner that taught me how to refine my approach. I had this young woman in my parish who was a college athlete at the nearby school. And she was diagnosed with pulmonary scleroderma. It's a hardening of the lungs. As the condition grows, they grow weaker and weaker. Either their heart will fail or their lungs will first. And this robust athlete, as I would visit her in her hospital bed, sort of raged against the limitations she faced. She just couldn't do it all, given her condition. And what she had to learn was to prioritize her limited strength and resources. When you go back, you have to take stock. You got to figure out what is it that we really can accomplish. And so she started to explain to me something that's actually an organizational principle. It's called the spoon theory. Does anybody know of the spoon theory? The spoon theory is basically you only have so many spoons in the drawer. And what she had learned is you cannot borrow from tomorrow, and you cannot use spoons you do not have. So let's say you have 5 spoons. What are you going to spend them on? So when you go back, you have to start out. Where will we place our priorities? Each of us faces the limited reality of resources. You only have so many spoons in your drawer. So how will you deploy your limited resources to meet the definition that you have articulated? So in this mindset, we say, what should we focus on? Because you can't focus on everything. Every activity will take a spoon out of the drawer. And because many things are important, but not everything is essential to the Great Commission. Some of you are asking me, what are some of the things that you would focus on? Now, it's interesting, if you look through your own survey results and you look at what are the ministries in your communities that have the greatest level of participation, you may want to start with looking at that list and questioning if you have the essentials first. Okay? Sadly, many of our parishes decide to spend their spoons on the wrong thing. Okay? Number 3. I'm kind of abbreviating these slides because I've been asked to kind of move this along. Step 3, strategic planning. Look, I think some of us can be ambivalent or even opposed to this step, and it took some time for me to really realize the true value. Now, we said earlier that in blind spotting, one of our barriers, we may have articulated a vision and a mission, but it's actually not put into play. We don't gain alignment and congruency. And that is problematic. In other words, it's just a white paper. You've just developed it, but you don't really use it, okay? Now, 17 years ago, I was put in charge of organizing my Metropolis' clergy and laity, and we had for the first time a recent convert priest, an Anglican priest that was now ordained as an Orthodox priest, and he was coming to our assembly. And much like your assembly, we sat for 4 hours at the opening talking about budgets and forms, And I was mortified, thinking, this guy's going to think this is the biggest mistake of my life. So I went up to him afterwards and I said, Father, what did you think of your first Clergy-Laity? He said, it is the best clergy meeting I have ever been to. And I was like, is there something wrong with this guy? And he said, no, this was awesome. I'm not joking at all. He said, I've attended clergy meetings for 30 years in the Anglican Church, and we debate whether or not Christ is divine. He said, none of that's up for debate with you guys. You're talking about forms. This is awesome. But the story illustrated something for me, because I realized, really, the Orthodox Church, her traditions, her worship, it really is perfect. So why are we struggling with the Great Commission? It usually boils down to the limitations that we've placed, the barriers I mentioned, and one of them tends to be strategic planning. A vision. Now, there are all iterations on how I describe this. This is how, as I've read it and studied it, this is how I look at it. A vision. A vision is a dream. It's something you'll never reach. It describes the future. So in my parish, it's an Orthodox parish where people find transformation in Jesus Christ. And I talk about that vision all the time. It's on all of our publications. I quiz parishioners all the time. Tell me what the vision is. Right? What am I trying to do? Gain congruency, alignment. Immediately thereafter, it's the mission. So I say to them, how do we accomplish this vision? And they'll tell me, Father, you've told me 4 ways we do it. Worship, service, education, community. Thank you. Each of those has a tagline. The mission statements of the church support the dream. Okay? And they're focused on the present. Next is your values. So in our community, our values are representative of our definition of parish health. Then comes your long-range strategic goals. These are 3 to 5. These are big rocks. Okay? Each of those is supported by SMART goals. Those are 1 year. All of these are reviewed annually. They're adjusted. They're tweaked. You're constantly looking at them. I mentioned yesterday that a SMART goal is specific. It's measurable. It's action-oriented. It's realistic. And it's time-sensitive. Okay? If you're totally baffled by these terms, simply ask anyone who's in sort of that organizational mindset, and this is language that they're well aware of. Next comes an organizational chart. And how many of our parishes are organized? Once someone asked Metropolitan Isaiah why they should join the Orthodox Church, because they don't believe in organized religion. And his response was, then you should join us. We're not organized. That it's a good laugh, isn't it? But it's a terrible statement. We should be organized. We should know what our roles and responsibilities are. And now each of these steps and all of this cascading goes right back up to the vision, right? It all supports the vision. So each of my ministries has been asked to come up with their vision statement that supports the vision statement of the parish. I asked them what their mission statements are, their long-range goals. Remember that cadence chart? So I meet with my ministry leaders, right? Some of them, the cadence is frequent. Like if it's Philoptohos, it's got to be every month. Parish council every month. But, I've got a group that makes welcome baskets for the newly baptized. I meet with them every 6 months. I don't need to meet with them every month. Step 4, tactical. Putting the plan together that supports specifically the 1-year goals. That's the resources, the money, the people. These are the ways that we implement the SMART goals. It's how we get into the nitty-gritty. Someone asked me yesterday, should a parish council member make the announcement after church? And I said, well, that's too nitty-gritty for your parish council meeting, right? The tactical is that committee level. It's the worker bees, right? But I have to tell you something about this stage, and it's related to buying jam. At the tactical level, you can't give people too much to do or too many choices. It's got to be a handful of things. So there was a study about purchasing jam and making decisions. And the study started with giving people 20 jams to choose from, So you sampled the jam, you were given a coupon, $4 off, buy a jam. No one bought jam. Well, some people bought jam, but not very many. And then they gave them 6 jams. Lots of people bought jam. So at the tactical level, what we want our workers to know is 2 or 3 things that you want them to do. Okay? And when you start to put this plan together, you review it. You keep it simple. A handful of goals. So keep it simple. Number 5, review. There's a famous phrase. I think it was one of the founders of Hewlett-Packard. He said, if you don't measure it, you will not improve it. Knowing where you are. Don't guess. You got a survey that asked you questions, and one of the priests came up to me and said, I had not thought about how many baptisms and chrismations we'd had until you asked me the question, and I went back and looked, and lo and behold, our best years were about 10 years ago. Okay, well that's good information, isn't it? If you're slowly decreasing in the number of baptisms and chrismations, that tells you something. How many of you can tell me with accuracy how many people attended Palm Sunday 5 years ago? I can. We've kept the records. I can tell you how much we collected. Those are trailing indicators about parish health. And if you say to me numbers don't matter, then you haven't read the Bible. Right? There's numbers in there. They tell you. Okay? So we've got to measure it. We've got to review it. We've got to know, right, where we are. Now, those long-range strategic goals that are 3 to 5 years, those and your SMART goals get reset. They're based on the gaps. You start to review these goals in your parish council, in that leadership, right? What's your role as leadership? It's to guide and shepherd the culture. So you're looking at these goals and these SMART goals, and you're asking yourself the question, are we meeting them? Right? So I think that the long-range strategic goals, probably annually or biannually, you're really looking hard at those. At the worst, 3 to 5 years. Your SMART goals, probably every quarter, maybe every 6 months, but please not less than once a year, right? And you reset. Now, a very strategic element. We're doing that right now. We just hit 3 years with our current strategic plan, and we're redoing the whole thing. We've sat down, we're tweaking and smithing our mission statements. We're looking at our long-range strategic goals. We're resetting our SMART goals. In fact, they were all due on March 3rd. What's today? March 5th. So all of our leaders were expected to turn in their SMART goals on the 3rd. We've got a retreat scheduled again to now review those. I think this is our 4th meeting with our outside coach. As you go. Very little will happen unless in every stage of this process you socialize and communicate up and down, across and back. You listen and edit. You develop that alignment and congruency. And the point of all this communication is to get people to buy in. I'm talking to you, trying to get you to buy in. That's the role that a leader does. He tries to change and shepherd the culture. You go, you get on the same page with your leaders, and then you do the same. And are there going to be people who oppose you? Absolutely. 20% probably. Okay? Now, here's a rule in organizational behavior. Don't work to convert the 20%. That will take 125% of your effort. 80% of your effort will give you 80% of the people. So spend your time there. Okay? Communication doesn't mean there will not be opposition, but it does mean that they'll be listened to. Some losses will be gains. Some people are going to say, not for me, Father. Not for me, Parish Council President. I'm out. Okay? But what you're trying to do is get the largest amount of people to engage. Okay? Now, of course, you need support from your hierarch. Of course, you need support from systematic systems, your Metropolis Council and on up. Okay, fine. But in the end of the day, do win their hearts and minds. Okay? All right. Making it happen. Well, we've talked about this. You've got to have the culture to support the strategy. Strategy gets eaten by culture. Culture eats strategy for lunch. So if your culture's not right, you're just going to be swimming upstream. Okay? Leadership. You have to have developed the internal leadership to do this. Someone has to supply it. It doesn't necessarily have to be the priest. In fact, it's not necessarily something the priest can do, but he has to support it. So if you're a parish priest in the room, you have to gather the people, approve their efforts, and support it over the long haul. All right. I'm doing pretty good, Tomaida. I'm at 20 minutes. Why? We want to build a parish for every generation. So this is the only slide of my parish in here. That's the iconography that just got installed. Okay? And we're looking to basically replace ourselves with the next generation, aren't we? And we want to make sure that our performance is not uneven. So we've got to build a culture that can sustain every generation, right? What you reap, you sow. So if you're in one of those situations where you're saying, boy, we're struggling with some things, that's okay. 7 years later, hopefully it'll be different, right? And then that next generation will build upon that. I'm going to stop here, Tomaida. Look at that.